Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. Salt offers cash loans collateralized by Bitcoin and other cryptos. There are no income checks, no credit checks, and no origination fees. Salt offers comprehensive insurance for your collateral assets and locks them in deep cold storage with a robust multi-sig process for the duration of your loan. With Salt's online platform or mobile app, track your loan or make deposits and payments on the go. Pay back as much as you want whenever you want and wrap up your loan at any time with no prepayment penalties. Once your loan has been paid back, your assets are returned to you. Visit saltlending.com/Tatiana to sign up for an account and start exploring your options today. saltlending.com/Tatiana. This episode of the Tatiana Show is brought to you by Vaultoro. Vaultoro is a gold hedging solution for the crypto community. One of the challenges of investing in cryptocurrencies is dealing with volatility. Keeping a diversified portfolio is a key to healthy returns. I keep about 10% of my crypto assets in gold using Vaultoro. Vaultoro allows me to open a gold wallet in seconds where I can easily trade with cryptos and gold. What I like about using Vaultoro instead of Tether is that the gold in my Vaultoro wallet is insured, audited, vaulted in Switzerland, and unlike fiat money, gold has increased in value for the last 20 years. Visit vaultoro.gold/Tatiana today and get zero trading fees for the first 3 months. That is vault, like a gold vault, and oro, which is Spanish for gold. Vaultoro, ole! Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tatiana Show. Buckle your safety belts because this is going to be a wild ride with Michael Boldin from the 10th Amendment Center. I'm joined today also by my handsome and debonair co-host Josh Shigala of Vaultoro. Hey, Josh, how's it going?
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for that beautiful intro. I'm buckled in, that's for sure, and I'm very excited.
Wonderful. I feel like we start off every show very excited, but that's okay because there's a lot of things to be excited about. Sometimes you look outside and you see clouds. Sometimes you see sunshine, and that's what we're here to bring you with the Tatiana Show.
Better than buckled in and very depressed.
Yes. Thanks to our sponsors over at Salt Lending and, of course, Vaultoro.com. We get to do the Tatiana Show and tell people about all this neat stuff happening all around the world. There's a new thing happening with Vault, right? Over at Vaultoro. What's happening, Josh?
Oh, it's super exciting. We're launching Vaultoro 2.0 for those that have been with us for a while. You've been anticipating, so make sure you sign up because it's launching next week. It's really exciting, the new trading platform.
Where do they sign up?
At vaultoro.com. That's vault as in a gold vault, and oro, which is Spanish for gold, and you can trade your Bitcoin and gold.
Very good. You know, Michael knows about Bitcoin and gold because Michael is a friend of mine from the libertarian world. So he knows about all that stuff and more. But he's been working at the 10th Amendment Center for as long as I've known him. So why don't we bring him on the show? Michael, welcome to the show.
No pressure. This just has to be the most exciting episode ever.
I think people, that's what they're expecting.
I mean, we're starting out on a hot note. So hi.
How's it going?
Great.
Hey,
So
when you're talking 10th Amendment, of course, it's exciting.
Oh yeah, we're pumped. We are pumped.
Yeah, pumped to succeed.
Well, or decentralize everything. I mean, crypto world, I think people really get that concept of decentralization because you don't want a single point of failure. I just, in my work, and I've run this organization since 2006. I mean, I started out as a blog because I hated the Bush administration. I'm anti-war. I was an anti-war activist for a few years before that. And I just hated everything that they did. And I'm like, oh, there's this thing in the Constitution that says everything that they're doing, they're not supposed to. So I'm like, I'm just going to blog about it and point out how these people are awful all the time. But then it really kind of caught on, and I just recognized that whatever the issue is, and it's not just money, but it's everything. When you have a single point of failure, you run into a situation where, if we want to talk like founders type of stuff, you're going to run into a situation where there's going to be corruption, plunder, and waste. So when one person controls an entity, whether it's banks or your healthcare, I believe that the more options and the more free choice, the better you're going to be.
Well,
absolutely.
Hold on, boys. I feel like we're off to the races as expected.
You said this is going to be amazing.
It is, and we're going to let it be amazing. But for people that don't know what the 10th Amendment is and what the 10th Amendment Center is, can you just give the general premise for it just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, for sure. So general premise behind the 10th Amendment, and this is part of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution of the United States, is that the federal government is authorized to only do a certain amount of stuff. It's very limited. It's spelled out in the Constitution. It's about 30 to 35 things, depending on how you count it, and everything else is supposed to be reserved to the states or to the people. So the way that they created the whole structure was under this notion that if you have a big country with a wide range of political, religious, economic, and social viewpoints, the only way that you can live together in peace is by allowing people to have their own views and their own way of life in their own area. Decentralization writ large. So I live in Southern California in LA, and I know my lifestyle here is probably maybe not awesome to someone who lives in Boise, Idaho, and vice versa, or South Carolina. So that if you just have the national or the federal government handle a few basic things like foreign policy, regulating some trade, things like that, and then people can make decisions on the most difficult and divisive issues, how they see fit in their own area. That way you're not going to have people at each other's throats every couple of years to try to control the entire system, which is how it is actually today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. But do you think that that people are aware of this right now? Do they know that this is part of their set of things that they can do to fight back against the system?
Well, I don't know how many people are aware of it, but it certainly is happening. And one thing that I've worked on pretty heavily, especially being a Californian for all these years, I moved to California in 95 or so from Wisconsin. And I remember there was this vote, Prop 215, to legalize marijuana for medicinal purposes. That was on Prop 215 in 1996, the Compassionate Use Act. And in the run-up to that vote, 3 different presidents, one current and 2 previous, came to the state that said, you guys can't do this. Federal law says this plant is illegal. Prohibition. You cannot do this. It's illegal. And if you do it, you're going to waste all your time, money, and energy in an expensive lawsuit that you're going to lose. And here we are more than a couple of decades later, and there are 33 states that are actively defying Washington, D.C. on a plant. And I think this is the type of thing, if we want to get into more detail on that, we can, but this is the type of approach. Basically, when enough people say no to a centralized federal policy and enough states or local jurisdictions pass laws to back them up, it becomes almost impossible for the central government to do anything about it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think this is where it comes down to, hey, it's centralized, so centralization is bad, but I don't think that's true. I think what needs to happen is competition between decentralized systems to say, hey, there's this amazing decentralized system that we can exit to if you centralized systems don't keep up and don't act fair and don't try to better yourselves, because the decentralized systems really allow for maximum competition.
Yeah, and when you have a one-size-fits-all solution, whether economically or politically, no one learns. You don't have the competition. It holds back the whole society, in my view, because when a mistake is made, it affects everybody, and it's harder to figure out where the problem is. For those of us who don't realize, that many times the centralization can be the problem. But when you don't have as many options, how do you know which one's going to rise to the top or fail faster? So if California has one version of something and Oregon has another version, you've got something to compare to each other. But when everybody has one, it takes so much longer to get to new solutions.
Yeah, it's funny because money tends to be this thing where everyone hates monopolies except for when it comes to money. It's like, no, we need this one money. The government needs to run all money. And so we're seeing exactly what you just said play out in money, where we have the ability now to have better money, or at least to experiment with other types of money and say, hey, well, this one doesn't actually work as well as this one because we've tried this one and everyone's gravitating towards it and it's gaining value. And so the ability for a decentralized system to compete against a centralized governmental money is really a massive step in freedom and liberty.
I just want to apply it to everything. We see it also not just on weed, but we see it on immigration here in the United States. It's a highly charged issue, the notion of immigration sanctuary cities. These are localities, there's somewhere around 300 or so, where the local jurisdiction does not provide assistance to the federal or central government in the enforcement of generally a very narrow range of federal immigration laws. In some areas like San Francisco, the state of California as a whole, San Francisco is stronger than the full state. Oregon, for example, it's a little bit broader. But when they don't participate in the enforcement of the federal law becomes very difficult to enforce. So you don't see the people who complain about the immigration sanctuary cities, you never hear them say that they don't like them just because of the language they use. Oh, that hurt my feelings that they're creating this sanctuary city. They don't like them because they actually have an impact on the ability of the central state to actually do what they're trying to do.
That's a really good point.
Cool. I guess we're done here.
Yeah, we're done. Let's go home.
Do you think that one president is going more overboard than the other in terms of encroaching and using federal power more inappropriately than, some people say that Trump is good, some people don't. Do you have an opinion? Do you think that they're all pretty much terrible on that?
I do have an opinion. Yes, one president is worse than the other. And the rule of thumb is that the current president is always using more power than the previous one, which used more power than they're all horrible. Trump is a piece of garbage. He is I'm a Constitution guy. I run the 10th Amendment Center, have done so for over a decade. And if it comes to constitutional fidelity, the man is awful. Here's a guy who was elected to be the Second Amendment president. He was backed by the NRA. People love the NRA. They hate the NRA. They have the view that the NRA is for unfettered gun rights, that the government isn't going to get involved at all. But we've run through the statistics, and Trump has done far more enforcement on federal gun control than even Obama did. So this notion that Trump was going to be better or worse than Obama on guns, depending on where you land in that view, he certainly has been more aggressive, pushing the federal government to enforce even further. He's also expanded the surveillance state. He signed a 6-year extension on the FISA warrantless surveillance, Section 702. And now he's pushing for a permanent reauthorization of Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That's the call records program where they're sweeping up the call records of everybody. This is the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution said, you can't have a search or seizure unless it's based on a warrant based on probable cause. And the notion that they can just surveil everyone just for existing or communicating with each other is repugnant to the principles of freedom. But yet Donald Trump, like his predecessors, wants to expand that further and further and further.
Do you think it's there's other countries that are doing it better?
I have no idea. I do have some escape routes of where I would like to go should I need to. I've thought about this. I love Baja, but I don't know if the country is better there or not. I really just don't understand what's going on in other areas.
Yeah. It's because I often hear Americans, they really don't have a clue about any other place. And really there are some areas in the world where there are just more freedoms, but usually veiled in actually more sort of dictatorial power, but it's just more chaos around. So it's kind of strange. A lot of Asian countries, it's just total chaos, but actually there's a lot more freedom.
I talk about that with my friends who shit talk about living in Los Angeles, where I've lived for the last couple of decades. I love big cities. Part of the reason that I love them is because it's impossible to enforce all of their crap. You can go through neighborhoods of LA where basically every business is an unlicensed restaurant. My favorite Thai place for years, I would find it on Grubhub, was in somebody's upper flat, basically, and they were an unlicensed restaurant, but you couldn't go to the restaurant. It was only delivery, and they were cooking out of their home kitchen, and I loved it. I mean, I guess I haven't shopped there for a while, so maybe they got shut down, but you'll run into this type of thing all the time. Even like something as simple as food carts. For the longest time, the city of Los Angeles tried to shut down tens of thousands of unlicensed, unregistered, illegal food carts, primarily lower income people trying to earn a living selling hot dogs with bacon wrapped around it that smells amazing when you leave a nightclub, for example, trying to sell these on the street for cheap and just earn a living. So the city kept trying to shut them down, but people were like, no way, man. There were all kinds of protests. There wasn't this concern about safety. Of course, the government people always told us this, and eventually they decided to legalize them. And I think it's almost absurd because basically what the city council said to the people here is, those 10, 20,000 illegal carts, all that illegal stuff you've been doing, well, now you can do it. No worry. But they've been doing it all along anyways. And that goes back to my original point in dealing with the federal government. I think the same approach can deal with any level of government. When enough people say no to that government, it proves that markets are stronger than government force.
Yeah. If California is, notoriously left-leaning, especially like in terms of political activism, do you think that having these small examples are a way of bringing communities together in terms of fighting federal power? You know what I mean? Because then all of a sudden they may see the benefit of having less involvement. Or do you think, are they taking advantage of that? Are you making inroads with different communities other than libertarians?
Yeah, we definitely make inroads with whatever political realm isn't in power in Washington, D.C. all the time. So when Obama was in power, we certainly got a lot more support from people on the right. When Bush was in power, we got people from the left, and the same thing is happening with the Trump years. And then, of course, libertarians like this type of thing all along, especially ANCAPs. They see this as the path towards ANCAPistan. The more that you decentralize, the more that you get close to the individual. So, yes, the question is how many carry over. I think a lot of people are lacking principles. I don't want to be too arrogant and condescending, but people tend to shift their principles based on who's in power in Washington, D.C. They support or oppose something. So you could talk about a guy like Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, who was willing to filibuster, try to stop the government from operating when it came to funding Obamacare, the Health Affordable Care Act, when Barack Obama was in office. But when Trump gets in and he's getting challenged by somebody for re-election, he votes to fund the thing. So they don't really politicians don't have principles in general. And I think a lot of their backers just go along with whatever team is in charge. So if Donald Trump wants to be a gun control guy, then of course you're going to see a lot of Republicans supporting gun control because their guy is doing it. But if Obama tried to do the same thing that Trump does, and he did, he actually attempted to ban a piece of ammunition called an M855. And he used the exact same approach, an executive approach, to make a new definition in current law that Trump did to ban a bump stock accessory. But when Obama did it, you had huge opposition from the right, and when Trump does it, very little. So that's the long version of saying, yes, we definitely make inroads with communities. We find that doing so is best by single-issue coalitions. So, for example, in opposing mass warrantless surveillance, we've done great coalition work with the ACLU, both national and on state levels. We've also worked with Electronic Frontier Foundation and Greenpeace. We flew a blimp over the Bluffdale data center in Utah a couple of years ago. So we'll work with anybody on a particular issue. And my view is that once they say, Boldin and those guys, they're not too bad on surveillance, maybe I'm willing to listen to them on something else. And sometimes they will listen to you on something else. And sometimes, like I was at a meeting with Edward Snowden's attorney in New York at ACLU headquarters. And at one point at the beginning of the meeting, they're like, well, you guys are in with all that gun stuff. Ha, 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 ha. So they're not interested in our approach on other things. But you know what? If we can work together, if we can set aside differences on everything else and work to accomplish something positive on protecting privacy, for example, I'm happy to do that with whoever is willing to come to the table.
Yeah, that's a really great attitude, because if you sit down a massive audience and say, right, who's for gay marriage, and everyone everyone's standing and a few people sort of sit down, and eventually everyone will sit down and there won't be any common, but a lot of people have a lot of stuff in common. So it's really important to look at what we have got in common and work on that. I absolutely agree. And this is this whole, divide and conquer strategy that is often used. to shut things down, shut positive things down. So it's great to see that.
Yeah, I think if I had an all or nothing approach like some people do, like my team live or die, I'd never visit my family on the holidays. I mean, there's no chance. Why don't we take the same approach? So many of us will, like, if we don't get along with our families on something political, why can't we do the same thing with the general public? Just because someone is different from you in their views on gay marriage or immigration or the right to keep and bear arms or surveillance or whatever. Why can't you just have discussions about those things, but work instead to find where you have the common ground, find where we're more similar rather than where we're different? And I think, at least for us as an organization at 10th Amendment Center, that's where we've had the most effect, because we've focused almost solely on single issue coalitions. So whether it's pushing for sound money, like we even supported the legislation in Wyoming to advance cryptocurrency there. So we're on board with competition and money, of course, but we'll work with people on crypto, we'll work with people on gold, we'll work with people on privacy, healthcare, whatever it may be, war, foreign policy, doesn't matter. And my goal is to reach as many people as possible on what's important to them.
I feel like you should run for office now. That
Gross.
was literally... Yeah, I mean, okay, fine. Not really, but that was a very good speech. What do you think about situations like with Snowden and with Chelsea Manning and, I don't know, that kind of...
They're heroes?
Well, yeah, obviously, that's a given, right? But, I mean, I haven't seen that many news stories about it, and now Chelsea's been in jail for a while.
Twice now, right?
Well, I think that they're going to keep her in there for a year and a half, last I read about it.
Horrible.
And they're giving her... like a $1,500 fine every day. So by the end of it, it's supposed to be like $460,000 or some kind of, I don't know. I mean, my numbers might be slightly off, but overall, I mean, they're just keeping her in a cage. And I don't know what's going to happen with Assange. And then you've got this whole thing that happened with Epstein where it's just so blatantly corrupt and ridiculous. And like, you got to be kidding me, right? So I don't know. Any thoughts on the system even being something worth fighting? Because it sometimes feels like the system is so corrupt, they're just going to do whatever they want anyway.
Well, I gave a speech at Pork Fest. That's the Porcupine Freedom Festival up in New Hampshire from the Free State Project, their 10th anniversary. I was a backup. Someone called in sick, so they asked me to come in and do it. And my speech was basically, it was 0 to Rothbard instead of getting from 0 to 60. How do you get there from point A to point B? And my recommendation at that point, which is still the same today, is to forget the 202 area code even exists. That's Washington, D.C. Every minute, every dollar, every second that you put focusing on what to do about Washington, D.C. by contacting politicians, supporting or opposing politicians is wasted. It's just a waste of time. The federal government will never fix itself. You can never find federal politicians that will get into office and say, oh, all this power that you've left for me, I don't want it now. It just doesn't happen. It's the nature of power that because it is the most powerful government in the history of the world, the people that are drawn to that love using that kind of stuff, and it'll be a rare thing that someone doesn't want to. Going to the federal courts to stop the federal government is just as absurd in my mind. There's been about 20,000 laws passed in history, and maybe a small fraction of those even make it to the Supreme Court. So it's all just a wasted strategy. What actually has an impact, what actually has worked in modern times is this 10th approach, this 10th Amendment approach, decentralization, working on a state or a local level. That's a place that you could have an impact. Now, it is obviously pretty difficult in places like New York or Los Angeles, but certainly if depending on the issue, you can actually get things done in local areas or your county, especially in smaller towns. It's a lot easier to push somebody. We've been told by state legislators that sometimes as little as 10 phone calls can actually get them to start paying attention to something. But yet in Washington, you could have tens of thousands and they'll do whatever they want anyways.
I remember the biggest time I realized that federal governments really don't care about something. I was very young and the French were bombing Nuoro Atoll with nukes to test them. And there was massive demos all around the world. And I thought, wow, something's got to change, right? And then, of course, nothing happened. And then the Iraq War, again, everyone's like, no, don't go in there. they just went on in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was record-breaking demonstrations all around the world, especially in the States, of course.
Bigger than Vietnam. I participated in that. When we had protests, and I actually helped organize some of them with a group called California Peace Action. The main group was the Answer Coalition, and this is where I got my political activism chops, was in the streets opposing the Iraq War. I was out the day the bombs started in 2003, almost getting run over by a tracked vehicle run by the LAPD that was actually provided them most likely through a grant program from Washington, D.C. that shouldn't exist, that they shouldn't participate in. But yes, people were out in the streets. Basically, what they're all doing is they're asking the federal government to stop doing stuff that the federal government wants to do. And we should know we should be smarter by now. Begging rulers, and I can call them that. I'm not trying to call them elected representatives, because they rule over us. They do what they want, no matter what the situation is, unless they may risk re-election. But that doesn't seem to be a problem for these people. So asking them, begging them to change their approach doesn't work. It is a failed strategy. And I really believe that the only way forward for peace and liberty, for individual sovereignty, is to localize, to decentralize. I'll say it over and over and over again, but that is really the thing that has worked in modern times, in my view.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Do you think that can be implemented with an anti-war thing? I mean, I feel like that's one of the things that I feel the least amount of control over. Why Bitcoin is specifically because of the ability of the Federal Reserve to print money. So perpetuating endless war becomes a lot easier. I don't know. What do you think around decentralization to end the wars? I mean, what can we do now besides using cryptos? Are there any other ideas?
Well, I think Roger Ver makes good points about taking money out of the hands of these central governments. This is the way that they fund these things. So certainly, I think it isn't as direct. So, for example, with marijuana, with cannabis, it is actually a direct action. You are literally encouraging your local government, local or state. It could actually be on a local community. So, for example, psilocybin was just decriminalized, magic mushrooms is what people call them, in Oakland and Denver. So you can take these direct actions on a local or a state level on things that are prohibited by the central government. Legalize or decriminalize what the government prohibits. So it's a little bit more difficult on the war issue, but I think it's just as important. The empire, it's the biggest empire the world has ever known. So I believe that every way that you undermine the central state's power actually reduces its ability to keep doing this. So money, I think, is incredibly important. Surveillance is incredibly important, to reject their surveillance programs. And then on top of it, there are some ways to actually oppose the foreign policy mess just head on. So, for example, we all learned about CIA torture rendition flights during the Bush years. Well, it turns out that they were running that in partnership primarily with the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina was providing the facilities for the CIA to fly in and out and take them to these third world countries where torture is supposedly allowed, and then torture people there. But if North Carolina doesn't participate in it, they have to go to another state. And if that state doesn't participate, it just you basically stop participating, box them in, and make them try to figure out how to do it on their own. And maybe they will figure it out, but we don't have to help them. Why should each one of us participate in these gross acts of they're just monstrosities. And then as far as actually deployments to war, there is an effort, for example, in West Virginia by a guy named Pat McGeehan. He's a state delegate there. He's been introducing for the last few years a piece of legislation to ban the state from providing its National Guard troops. It's a small piece of the military empire, but it is a piece. And for the first time ever, he got it passed out of his chamber in the House, or at least got an approval vote in the House, basically saying, look, we're just not going to participate in this anymore. And we really need to push on those types of things. Cindy Sheehan, a number of years ago, if you guys remember her, she was the woman who camped out in front of the Bush Ranch because her kid died, basically opposing the war. She still is very strong anti-war today, but she supported this kind of effort while Bush was in office as well. I'm assuming she'd be on board today. I haven't communicated with her about it, but maybe we need to build a coalition to start. It's almost like an underground railroad to encourage people to stop participating in the war machine. That's what I think needs to happen.
Yeah, that's really a great message, and it's an important one, but it's sometimes very, very hard to do. You kind of, you feel like you have to do certain things like pay your federal taxes and all these sorts of things, which are obviously you should or shouldn't, depending on your what you want to do. But I feel that a lot of people feel helpless because it is such a massive power arching over them, and for something that they don't believe in, they don't really have a say. And I guess this is where I really like technology, right? This is where I love the fact that we can pull away from certain things or build out away from certain things. I guess Bitcoin is the most obvious one, but also telecommunications and postal and all these sorts of things we're moving away from using federal services globally because of technology.
I don't think we're helpless to the degree that it actually feels like we are. The simple act of using Bitcoin in commerce is actually a piece of the puzzle. The more that everyone does that, and not just so, as a merchant as well, I use Coinbase Commerce, for example. And when I receive my crypto, I don't convert it to fiat. Like, for example, when I used to use BitPay, I used the BitPay plugin with my WordPress WooCommerce shopping cart. And I don't know, maybe BitPay allows you to just keep it in crypto. Maybe I didn't know at the time. This is probably like 2014 or something when I first started using it. And just the fact that I'm allowing or encouraging that commerce and then using the crypto as I'm able to with other merchants, the more that we do things like this, I think we're undermining the central state's ability to control money. That is an incredibly important part of the overall equation. And while some people may want to take things further, other people just need to live their lives. They've got families, they've got 2-3 jobs sometimes, and there's only so much that you can do. So what someone decides to do in their own life, I think, is always a positive. And of course, maybe we all want to push each other a little bit more, but we can recognize that we all have our limits on what we're afraid of. Like, I'm afraid of not paying the IRS. I just signed up for a payment plan with those rip-off artists. They're criminals, but I'm paying a tribute to not be in a cage, basically. And I recognize that I can have far greater impact in my work by living in my apartment here in LA rather than in some federal prison.
Yeah, I mean, look at how that worked out for Irwin Schiff. It's Irwin, right?
Yeah, he died in prison. Yeah. Really sad.
Oh my gosh. I hate thinking of that because it's just like this reminder that things can be truly brutal. The state can be that brutal. Would you say that cryptocurrency is the thing that you're most excited about, with all of the activism that you've been doing, all your work, and with a passion for decentralization? Would you say that something like Bitcoin is the thing that you think has the most potential, or is there any other technology or progress being made that you think deserves attention and everybody's enthusiasm?
For me, the number one issue is weed. Always weed. Always really? Weed. Always weed. Because it is the example, I think, in all time, in all of history, at least in the United States, the greatest example of what we would call nullification in practice. Basically, we have 33 states. We have a majority of the country basically doing something that every level of the federal government says you're not allowed to do. Now, they're not perfect freedom in every one of these places, but I think it is the ultimate blueprint on how to get things done on other issues outside of money. And you can actually apply this on money as well. So we've worked, for example, like I said, on Wyoming to do things that maybe the feds aren't going to be really excited about. And we have to keep pushing on that. On gold and silver, for example, we're talking about old school sound money. Places like Utah, they basically removed all restrictions on using gold as money. So what happened? Right after that happened, the following year, a company opened up, United Precious Metals Association, UPMA.org. I'm not sponsored by them, but I like them. And they basically are a gold bank that's outside the Federal Reserve System. I know at a time they were providing basically like debit cards where it would do an automatic calculation behind the scenes where you could actually spend money similar to what I think a lot of people are trying to do in the crypto space as well. So to try to encourage people to store their money, to store their gold and use it actually as money in commerce. So we support all these types of things. But I really believe the weed issue is the way forward. We saw here in California back in 96, no one was using it. I mean, people were using it. The commerce existed, but it was totally black market. Some people might call that the real free market. But first it starts with individuals making the decision that they want to do something, even though they're told that they're not supposed to. And then eventually enough of them start using them where using that product where a local jurisdiction says, maybe we'll get some benefit about participating with this. Maybe we'll get a re-election. Maybe we'll look good to those people. And then the far-off central government still says, no, you can't do this. And over time, more and more people learn that the end of the world doesn't come because some people own or grow or sell or consume a plant. And I think the same thing can be applied on other issues. And we start seeing it happen on things like guns. We see it happening with the immigration sanctuary cities. Whether you're for or against these things, we know this approach actually works. And that's why I'm really excited about weed. Not that I'm just a customer, but because I could have purchased it before. But certainly I like seeing the business grow. Here, pun intended. A company here in Southern California called MedMen, and I think they might be trying to open in New York as well. They have all these billboards around town says witness history happening. And I think that's what we're really watching with the legalization of something that another layer of government says you can't do. Well, we're doing it anyway.
I really love the excitement in your voice around all of this, Michael, because
it's just coffee.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of people that we talk to. It's a very, very stressful, and sometimes, it makes you feel down when you think about all the problems facing some people. And I really like your enthusiasm for change in the positive and seeing the positive and seeing the solutions and what people can do. And I think it's a really good attitude to have. I just wanted to quickly touch on technology because I saw a video on your website, the 10thamendmentcenter.org, and if that's correct, right? .com, sorry. And it was about surveillance. And one thing I really struggle with surveillance is that I can't stand it, of course. But there are all sorts of use cases like on the web, and the web is a really good example of surveillance because cookies surveil you so they can keep you logged in, for instance. There's use cases for it. When you log into a website, they want you to stay logged in, and of course they need to track that. But then there's more nefarious ways through advertising and all these other things. Now, when we move forward with technology in terms of self-driving cars and everything else, and just your cell phones, the companies behind these cell phones are tracking and tracing and trying to use that data. And the things that us normal consumers can do is really only demand that they don't track us, but then sometimes they need to. And it's really difficult to then say to keep track of what the government is tapping into from these private organizations at the honeypot that they're sort of giving the state at the top of the tree, or at the bottom of the tree, I should say.
Yeah, for me, so you mentioned, for example, like advertising being nefarious. Personally, I use the Brave browser, so I don't really have too many issues with that. And I think we can all get ad blockers. I think the issue that I have with surveillance really, and especially when it comes to corporate surveillance, so facial recognition from Amazon, Facebook, elsewhere, it's pretty intensely good. Like it is scary good sometimes. Now, of course, it's 99% correct if you're a white male. If you are a black male or African, if you have more color in your skin, it is less accurate. If you're a black female, it is even less accurate. It keeps going down and down and down. They are already being able to tell what type of emotion you're having. I think Amazon just recently announced that they're very accurate, for example, with either fear or anger, something like that. So the potential for this, I think, in some business applications could be very interesting. But where I am frightened of it, I am absolutely freaked out is on how government accesses the data. And once government has it, then government uses it as a control mechanism, either to scare people out of their free speech. The more that people, how many times have all of us heard from somebody, oh, I wouldn't want to say that online. I know they're watching. I mean, we've all had that conversation, whether in jest or not, but I think there is some truth to that. People really have a chilling effect on their free speech because they know they're being watched at all times. Well, they're definitely watching, they're listening, they're doing all kinds of nasty stuff. And the frightening part is when government gets a hold of that. And government does have access to all of that stuff. So I'm not a fan. Facebook sucks. I still use it. I use it as a tool because I recognize that's where I can communicate with friends and family. I also use it as a marketing tool for my organization and business because it is very effective. Facebook ads are way cheaper. You can reach a lot of people for a couple of bucks. So I still will do that as long as I have access to it. But Facebook is willingly providing all the information to the government. And maybe it's not, maybe they don't really even want to. Maybe they recognize as a business that if they don't participate in these government surveillance programs, they're going to have a lot of problems operating. So to me, the problem at the end of this is always government, because government has guns. And when government doesn't like what they're doing, they'll send people with guns to try to stop you. They aren't always able to do that because they don't have the manpower, but there is always the fear of that. And how they actually monitor us. And the surveillance state is massive. It's not just our phone calls and our browsing history. There's ALPRs, automated license plate readers, that can track up to 800. They take pictures of 800 to even 1,000 license plates per minute, going 60 miles an hour. They know where everybody's going. Insane level of technology, these automated license plate readers. They also have what's called a Stingray device. These are cell site simulators. It's just what they sound like. It's a little portable box that's provided through grant programs from the FBI to local police to do granular surveillance in a local area. And what they do is the simulator tricks every cell phone within radius of a cell tower into first connecting to the box, and then it passes the signal off to the cell tower. Meanwhile, they're taking your location data, any browsing history, communications, your call, your text, whatever, without you even knowing it happened. It's totally seamless. And basically, you're being surveilled. Your warrant based on probable cause is because you made a phone call to a friend over on 6th and Main Street. So you're somehow under suspicion of potentially committing a crime. I mean, that's the way it's really being treated. And so the surveillance state is pretty massive, but it's in the hands of government that I believe it becomes truly dangerous. Because if it's just in the hands of Facebook, unless Facebook starts arming up, I'm not really frightened of Facebook, and I think there are tools to actually deal with it. What's the EOS social network? Has anyone done a follow-up on this? The Voice?
Voice. I think
that's going anywhere?
Yeah, I think it's going. Yeah, I mean, they've got enough money to keep it going. So
Dan Larimer, I mean, he did it with Steam, right? So maybe he's going to do an upgraded version here. So like things like this, I think through the competition, you can create alternatives. I mean, whether it's live streaming with the BitTorrent, the BeLive product, or it's a new social network that maybe won't spy on you. Who knows? I mean, I use Minds.com as well because I seem to be opposed to the Facebook approach. But none of these social media, these tech giants are willing to shoot me yet. So as long as that happens, I'm going to focus all my energy on being concerned about the people who are willing to do that, and that's government.
We've definitely got a kindred spirit here because many people ask me about that, but they're following me and they're tracking me. And I think, I'd rather them than the government, to be honest. I mean, what has Facebook really done apart from sort of manipulate us to vote for some idiot?
Well, I was listening to a guy, I don't know if you guys know who Gary Vaynerchuk, he's like just one of these YouTube guys. He's an entrepreneur guy, right? So Gary, you're a New Yorker, so everybody knows Gary there, right? So Gary, he was talking about this in a speech in England sometime in the last year that I was watching on YouTube. And he basically said, think about this. Let's say the Russians bought a bunch of ads that manipulated you towards supporting Donald Trump. Now, mind you, the assumption that this was a bad thing is that things would have been better had Hillary been president. I don't know. They're both pretty evil in my book. So Gary was basically saying, look, they may have bought an ad, but you clicked it. And the example he gave was pretty absurd, and this is just my version of it. But let's say you clicked on an ad for cereal. Well, that's going to tell the Facebook algorithm that you're interested in cereal, so they'll start delivering you more. And then if you keep clicking that, you're going to keep getting more. And that's the way he described it. He's like, we got to have some personal responsibility here. So let's say the Russians bought a bunch of ads and there were fake news and all that. If it wasn't for the human action, the people who are actually interested in reading that stuff, it wouldn't have had any impact. It's the people's choice. So I think it's more for us, we have to be more interested in educating people on what's true and what's not. I mean, if we recognize that a lot of stuff published is going to be garbage, just like it was before the internet, it was garbage, but it was very much more centralized. If we have that approach to it, we're always skeptical and we don't want to blame one person or another, and we have to look inside towards ourselves. It's that old V for Vendetta line, right, in the film, where V was basically said, I know why you did it, but if you want someone to blame, look in the mirror, because it's our actions which are pushing these things to the forefront.
Spot on, yeah.
Awesome. I have another question. It's a little bit off topic before we break for the day, but in the spirit of surveillance, I was talking with somebody the past few days about what's happening over in Hong Kong and with China. And what he posited is that the Chinese are basically up against the wall where they have to take some kind of action, because if they allow these protests to carry on, then all the surrounding areas that they manage will have basically will be emboldened to protest more, and it could be very dangerous. But at the same time, this is a massive surveillance state, and it's such a large portion of people around the world. Do you guys have any opinion on that other than obvious thumbs down?
Yeah, definitely thumbs down. But I think if you want a view of how things will end up here eventually, I think looking to China as an example on the surveillance state is really a good idea. There's a piece of legislation that has really strong bipartisan support in Washington, D.C. It's like 126 co-sponsors in the House, called the TAPS Act. And this is to create a process on basically what we could call pre-crime. And I think this is the next tier. They want to create a kind of something called laser and Palantir. And what they're doing is they're giving people a threat score, similar to the social credit score in China, but literally they're scoring people 0 to 10 or whatever number system they are. And in LA, the example is that if you get too high on this, you're going to start getting visits. You're going to get stalked by police officers in your neighborhood. They're going to start making contacts and showing up. And I think this is the type of thing that the TAPS Act wants to put nationwide. They basically want to have that type of approach. Now, the TAPS Act doesn't necessarily do that directly, but it empowers the Department of Homeland Security to implement this type of program for the whole country. So I think for me, when it comes to surveillance, the facial recognition, for example, we know San Francisco was the first city in the country to ban its use by all government agencies. Second was, I think, it's a small town, not Cambridge, but another one just outside of Boston. Then Oakland, we expect Berkeley to be on board with that. There's legislation pending in Michigan to ban the use of facial recognition by government in the state there. Here in California, Assembly Bill 1215 is up for a final vote in the next few days in the state Senate to ban facial recognition or any biometric tools on police body cams. And I think these are very positive moves in response. And I don't know if they're motivated by what's happening in China, but it's certainly kind of the way that you see people covering themselves up, covering their faces up in Hong Kong and taking down a surveillance cam, a facial recognition cam pole, because that's how dangerous it is. You got to be hiding. You're frightened of what's going on. And when you have enough people out there to help you out, maybe you'll get a little courage. But we don't want it to go that far. They certainly are pushing to implement this all over the place here in the U.S. as well. And if people don't take action to stop it while it's still in its nascent stages and its early days, I think we're going to end up just like that.
Yeah, it's not only the US. I've heard that up north in Australia, Darwin, they want to have a pilot project where they're keeping points on people similar to the social credit system. And it's a slippery slide, and it'll happen very, very quickly, I fear. So again, this is why the power of state is so very important, because if one state then does do that, then you can just move to another state and hopefully they don't incorporate it there as well. But, if they roll it out on a federal level, really, you've got no chance. And I mean, a lot of the time, though, I just don't even trust that they have a law passed in California, no facial recognition. But end of the day, you've got cameras everywhere. They're recording everything. Yeah, they might not be facially recognizing yet, but they're keeping backups of all this stuff and can then just run a massive server farm just to calculate everything in the past. And it's just, all in all, we just have to really fight that. Hopefully we can use techniques to lower the power of these ridiculous systems that we've held up in regard for so long, government systems.
Yeah, technology to defeat technology. I don't know what that is. I saw on Instagram there's a company, I think in Poland, that was making some kind of facial recognition blocking jewelry. Is this some pieces of metal that you would put over parts of your face? And it may get to that. Of course, you have these red state right-wing politicians that want to ban everyone from covering their face because they hate the Islams, is the way that, they want to stop Muslim terrorists, so they don't want anyone to wear a hijab. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but they don't want people covering their faces based on that. So the more that they use fear of some foreign threat, and we've been warned about this, we should know better by now. The greatest way that government increases its power is through fear-mongering. And of course, whether it's real or pretended, it's always going to do that regarding foreign threats. So as long as we're afraid of the foreign threat of terrorism, then we're going to be having politicians that are proposing things to deal with that. Like, you can't cover your face. But at the same time, then what if you want to cover your face to stop being caught up by these facial recognition cameras? So you're going to go to jail for doing that as well, wearing some jewelry, for example? Who knows? So I think we have to be kind of smart and on our toes on all these various issues because they kind of intersect.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen glasses that have LEDs, ultraviolet LEDs that shine out. So they just sort of pretty much put a big bright light in front of your face in there. So if you take a selfie, you just see this big flashing light. And You're right. This is a kind of an arms race, kind of, the people against, overarching state.
This has been awesome. Are you still doing your show, Michael? You had this brief show that you were doing, video that I caught a few times, and I liked it because it packed a lot of punch in a short amount of time. Are you still doing that? Because I'm sure some of my listeners might want to check in with you. So where can they connect with you and learn more about your work?
You are awesome for mentioning that. So the nature of my work means that I have lots of interesting news reports to cover from January through about April or May, because that's when state legislatures are generally in session, and that's what I cover. So I was doing this kind of 10th nullification news, 10 minutes covering up everything that was going on. I saw you tweet about it a couple of times. That was really awesome of you. I do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday live YouTube stream and a podcast edition at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out. 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Thank you for the opportunity to mention that. So if you want to keep up with me blabbing about various things, I talk about things like facial recognition, gun control, government spending, money, all that stuff all the time. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes maybe it sucks. But if you want to follow, that's where you go.
Any upcoming events?
I'm speaking at a Mises event here in Los Angeles in October. But other than that, I like hanging out in my apartment and walking around the neighborhood.
Very good. I like seeing the sunshine on fellow libertarian loving friends, because I don't know, I feel like sometimes people are just too stuck behind the computer. So your vibe is awesome. Seeing you is always such a pleasure. I hope I get the chance to soon. When I'm in LA, I'll look you up. And if you come to New York, let me know. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Tatiana Show today. It airs normally on Tuesdays. Sometimes we put a bonus show out on Thursdays. We also have Proof of Love, which is our relationship show. So go to www.proofoflovecast.com. We'd love to hear from you there. Thanks again to our sponsors, Salt Lending, and to our wonderful friends over at Vaultoro. Go to Vaultoro.com. Check out their new Vault program. And we'll see you all next time.
Hey there, it's time for the show. The Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life. and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. Thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond.